Welcome to Everyone Loves Guitar, where we get to sit down and talk with interesting professional guitar players and related music industry experts. If you love playing guitar, stick around. You're in the right place. Hey, this is Craig Garber from Everyone Loves Guitar, and if you're a guitar player who's looking to make some more money, then listen very closely to what I'm about to tell you. If you're a guitar player, or any other kind of musician for that matter, or if you know a musician who wants to make some more money without having to tour or go on the road, or put up with any of the other BS musicians normally have to deal with, then you need to download this new special report about how to make a small fortune by licensing your music. And by licensing music, I mean getting your music inserted into movies, television shows, and commercials. The report is less than 20 pages long, and it was written by Mike Elsner, who I interviewed in episode number 167 of this show. Mike's been doing this for over 14 years, and he's had over 2,000 songs licensed at this point in time. That means he's getting paid to license almost 150 songs per year. Now, keep in mind, most successful career musicians don't get paid for 150 songs in total over a 30 or 40-year career. Yet, Mike's getting paid for this on an annual basis. And the cool thing about this business is that you can run it from your own home studio, and you'll never have to deal with ivory tower record label executives telling you what to play and how to play it, and no shady managers or unethical business people telling you what to do either. So download Mike's free ebook on the 4-step plan to licensing success right now. Just go to everyonelovesguitar.com/Mike. That's everyonelovesguitar.com/Mike, M-I-K-E. Let me know how you like the book. And now let's get on with the show.
Okay.
Hey, everybody. This is Craig Garber from Everyone Loves Guitar. I got a really special guest today. We're here with Jim Oblon. Jim's a very unique player in that, how do I describe this? He's just not a conventional player. He's an extremely creative guy. He sounds wonderful. Very smart guy too, intellectual, just a cool dude. And he's a touring and studio guitarist. He lives in Nashville. He's from up north in Connecticut. He plays guitar, bass. He played guitar, bass, and drums on Paul Simon's 2011 album, So Beautiful or So What. Jim's got 3 albums of his own out. One was a critically acclaimed solo album called Sunset, where he's backed by legendary studio drummer Jim Keltner and Grammy-winning keyboardist Larry Goldings. He's also got 2 other albums called Skinwalker and Black Cat, and the story behind Skinwalker, the cover was pretty cool. And you could find those on Bandcamp. I'll give you specific addresses at the end. But I think we're in for a treat today. Jim's a really good guy. So, Jim, thanks so much for your time. I appreciate you coming on the show.
Thank you very much for having me, Craig.
Oh, you're welcome, man. If I remember correctly, you grew up in a musical family.
I did. Everyone played an instrument, and a lot of people doubled too. Like my uncle played bass, concertina, and drums. My other uncle played accordion. My grandfather played trumpet, and then some lady fell into him, like when he was playing trumpet, and knocked his teeth out, and then he had to switch to banjo. So he played tenor banjo, and then my father played drums, but really wanted to be a singer, and my mother played B3 organ, and she sang, and so everybody in my family was musical, you know, and my grandfather had a band, and then at parties and all that sort of stuff when I was a kid, you know, the accordions and concertina would come out, and it was just always music around. So definitely a complete, you know, musical family.
And this was in Connecticut
This is in Connecticut, yes.
Very cool. So, did you have brothers and sisters too? Or? I
had one sister, and she was more into. She wasn't into music. She was the one person that's sort of not into music, and but it was just mom, dad, sis, and myself. So that was the fam.
Did you know from an early age then that you were going into music? Was it almost, because I've talked to guys from musical families, and it's almost like that was there was no other, everybody knew that's what I was going to do.
Well, for me, it was like a really interesting childhood because, and this maybe will surprise you when I tell you this, but it was just the basement was filled up with instruments because both my mother and father were music education majors. So if you are to become a music educator, you sort of need to play the violin or the trombone, or like sort of have a splattering of all that stuff. And then they had a band together where they would play on the weekends. And so between like all these band instruments, and then my mother's organ, she had synthesizers, and the drums, and then my uncle gave me an electric bass. It was sort of like right from even before I was making choices, I was just always in the basement making sound. And then we lived kind of surrounded by woods. And so it was like this really interesting combination of like, I'd spend most of my time out in the forest or playing the instruments. And then weird stuff happened too. Like I'd go down and start making sound, and then after about like 4 or 5 hours, I would see spirits like of people would show up, and then I'd run upstairs and say to my parents, like, who are all the people downstairs? And so it's this weird thing that without really knowing it, maybe I was tapping into some stuff that Indian people do, where they go into a hut for 40 days and 40 nights, and then they just play their instrument. And after like 3 or 4 days, they start to hallucinate, and teachers show up, and it's like a real thing where all of a sudden spirits start to show up. So it would freak me out when it would happen. And maybe, I could have just like gotten to some trance like state, or I started to hallucinate or something. But that was a real part of like my childhood of like, okay, I'm going to go play, and then these things are going to show up and they're going to freak me out, and then I run upstairs, So that was like,
that is not an answer I was expecting to hear.
No, definitely.
The show just changed to, wait, what's that lady saying? The cards don't lie.
Exactly. Yeah. Very. Yeah. And then, but later on, what was kind of funny was I was in the back of the bus. This is a Paul Simon tour. I'm hanging out with the African guys, and that was like the smoking bus where you had like some like good whiskey or something, and then we'd listen to music and smoke cigarettes.
You don't smoke whiskey.
Drink
what do you mean?
Yeah. and then they were asking me about my childhood, and I told them about that, and they were like, "Oh, you're this," and they had and I wish I gotta
like
ask
some sort of name of somebody that. Yeah.
Yeah, it was like if you were in the tribe, that would just be this guy, and it's like, oh, okay, they weren't freaked out by it at all. But then also, one of the guys is the guys, I was telling you about that, like believed in shapeshifters too. So it's just this interesting thing where, and in a lot of like South Africa, there's a lot of killings that still happen to this day that are based on like some sort of superstitious killing. Like, you kill a person of your family and trade it for, that's like the really dark side of it. But those kind of murders started to show up in London because people are migrating from, Africa to London or whatever. But yet this sort of like some sort of witchcraft is still brought with them. And so, it's kind of too dark to talk about, but I guess my point is that to me, there's more to reality than meets the eyes. And it seemed like in talking to the African guys, they I guess if you said that like at a knitting circle in Ohio, they'd look at you like you were nuts. You know what I mean? But like for somebody that,
yeah, that culturally has spirits as not only like as a conventional part of their culture, not a deviant part of their culture.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So what I think is weird about the whole thing isn't the spirits. What I think is weird about it is that you're like so comfortable. Like how old were you when this started happening?
Oh man, I mean, it was really young. Probably 4 or 5 years old or something like that. Because and then I remember, and then I would go upstairs, and my parents reminded me of it. They would say, you keep asking, like, well, who are all the people downstairs that when they show up? Like, so it wasn't. What am I trying to say? So
they were cool. What was their response to it?
They kind of just. I don't know. You know, they really didn't even. They never told me really, but that was something that they would always say, and it's just it was a real part of my childhood. You know.
Wow. See, if that was me, I would have been like, "Get me the fuck out of here right now."
Well, you know, what's interesting is like 4 or 5 years old. I mean, I don't know if like you're hip enough at that age to make something like that up. You know, but it was like it was definitely. It would happen after about 4 or 5 hours of practicing. I wouldn't call it practicing because I would just be down there making sounds.
Sure.
And then the feeling in the room would change. It was almost like there'd be some sort of electricity in the air or something, and then that kind of stuff would start to happen. And it wasn't like they were talking to me or whatever. It would just be like out of the corner of my eye, I'd see something like standing there, and then I'd look, and it would be gone, and then it just started to happen. You know, it was very, very odd.
Yeah.
You know? So,
but you were never afraid or anything. That's what I think is like. I would have definitely been like, you know, seriously.
Oh no, I was afraid because that's when I would run upstairs and go like, you know, who the hell are all these people? You know, it was like, freak me out, and then other times I would just like. It was pretty funny because I had this monophonic Moog synthesizer that my mom had used for bass sounds, and then all of a sudden I start making some weird sound, and then I'd scare myself with the sound that I made on it, and then I'd have to run away. So that's like the cuter, non-paranormal version of it, you know. So,
wow, that's interesting. I've heard stuff like that. I don't disbelieve anything like that. I mean, you know, I've heard it enough times that if you think there was a spirit there, I mean, there was something there. I mean, it happened.
Yeah.
But wow, and to have it happen regularly, and the fact that it was consistently after the music comes.
Yeah, I think it might have been some kind of, you know, and I'm sure, you know, there's no way to prove or disprove it really. So it's all just, you know, someone could say it's just chemicals in the brain, and it very well could be, but it was sort of some altered state that would happen. You know?
Actually, Jim, this reminds you of this recurring Bugs Bunny episode that they used to have. I don't know.
I love Bugs Bunny, so let's go there.
No, I'm just teasing you. But it sounds like something that would, you know, and then he runs up the stairs and slams the door behind him, and he holds it, and the big guy, you know, is trying to, it's really Foghorn Leghorn or something like that. Wow, well, that is interesting, man. I'm almost afraid to ask you your next question, which is what was your childhood like? You can't beat this now.
Well, you know, and this is where I'll just, you know, be candid and honest. Where it was unhealthy. You know, it was an unhealthy childhood. There was some addiction in the family, and just crazy stuff where. Like I would hang out with my biker uncle, and he was into Buddy Miles, which is really hilarious because it's like this Polish guy that used to get perms so he could have an afro like Buddy Miles, you know. And like
this is the best interview I've ever done.
and then my parents didn't know about this, but they did not know. It was sort of like. Oh, well, my mother was going back to school and my dad was working. So it was like, oh, we need somebody to pick up Jim from nursery school. So my uncle was like, I'll pick him up, you know, and then and he would show up, and then we'd go down to like this kind of like a private club, like a VFW or whatever. And then he'd give me pony beers to drink and teach me how to play pool. So after nursery school, I'm like drinking pony beers. And
this
like
getting better and better, Jim.
Put English on the cue ball or whatever. You know, it's just like
God.
Looking back, like his addiction, you know, claimed his life, took him out of the world really.
Wow.
Relatively, you know, earlier than most people die. So
were you able to tie that? Were you able to tie his addiction, at a young age? Were you able to tie that he was dead because of that behavior?
Yeah, I mean, I think, in some ways, of course, you know, anybody would be horrified to think about a nursery school kid drinking beer, you know, like after nursery school. But in some ways, it was a little bit like chicken pox, like where by the time I got to high school, and because I started playing gigs when I was like 12 or 13, and you know, and when I was 12, I saw somebody do a line of cocaine in the bathroom. And so by the time I got to high school and everybody just started to get into drinking and partying, and like it was this taboo thing, like let's grab a bottle from the liquor cabinet and go out into the woods. I was kind of like already, been there and done that, and seeing the effects of like how some of the people looked at the club, because there'd be people shaking before they got their first drink, and so to see that as a little kid is of course horrible, and it could have sent me off the rails. But there's like that there's some Chinese sign for danger, but it also means opportunity, and I think that maybe something like that comes into play with a story like that, where you get exposed to the darker side of life from an early age, and all of a sudden it helped me in a way.
Sure.
Because I'm sort of not shocked by, I guess like what happens to high school kids, and then all of a sudden they drink and then they get into the car and they lose their lives or something. Like I was just sort of like, no, that this is stuff that needs to be respected, and even when someone called me at one point, either I was in middle school or high school, and I was hanging out with this funky crowd of people, and then they got a hold of LSD, and they wanted me to do LSD with them, and even at that like young age, I just thought, I'm not putting anything in my body that like I might not be able to come back from, and I thought that was a pretty cool thought for an adolescent or teenager to have. Yeah, just like that stuff can take you. And for other people, they could do it. It could be harmless, but I just know that I probably wouldn't have meshed with that stuff too well.
Good for you. I kind of can relate to you because my dad had a gambling problem, and he used to take us, we were little kids, to the racetrack, and I would go there and see every fucking degenerate gambler. It was just like the most repulsive place. I was just like so grossed out being there. And so I get that. And so I never that was never an appeal to me. Just, that whole giving up your family for stupid shit. So I kind of get what you're saying. Not same situation, but the understanding of it and being exposed to it when you shouldn't be. And then and I guess you could go two ways. You can either say, oh yeah, this is cool, I'm going to do that. But your case and in my case for these two things anyway, it was like totally opposite. I was like repulsed.
Yeah. And then then it segues right into my best friend, which is sort of like instruments, or the things that you somehow, and the bass, guitar, piano, drums, they're all of the rhythm instrument family. So it's this idea that you strike something, whether it be with a pick, whether you push down on a key and that engages a hammer to hit the string, or, like on guitar, I play with a thumb pick and fingers. You're all kind of striking something, and then it vibrates. And then, but the magic that sort of came out of that and the, sort of the joy of that was the non-counterfeit high.
Yeah.
And I think that's so it was sort of like to be exposed to, because that's what I look at addiction as. It's sort of a counterfeit version of something that we would enjoy, like that, like you get a high from a relationship because you're in love, or you get a high from music because it makes you feel so good, or it's like, or listening to, there's some tracks, some Led Zeppelin tracks where it's just like John Bonham sounds so great that I've been listening to that. I'm 42 now, and I've been listening to that since I was 12. And never does it ever come on the radio where I'm like sick of it, and I just always have to crank it up and just be like, oh, thank God John Bonham was born. It's just such a beautiful thing. So
I feel like that every time they play When the Levee Breaks. The opening
absolutely.
of that, it's just locks.
Oh.
I'm getting goosebumps now. It's like boom. That's just explosive, man.
And then on Coda, when they released these, sort of mixed versions or alternative versions, there's this track called "If It Keeps on Raining," and it was the prequel to when the official version of When the Levee Breaks, and John like everybody, I mean, John Paul Jones is playing like James Jamerson on it, and it's like I'm going to listen after the interview's over. I was planning on getting into the car and going to an Oyster Happy Hour already, and like I'm just going to crank that track because it just sounds so good.
What do you listen to music on in the car?
I just have my Pandora account, and then and then most of the stuff I like is on there, and I know I like that better than Apple Music for some reason. Maybe because like when you could set it so when your playlist runs out, it just goes to all the similar tunes, and then you're not in the car going 80 miles an hour, looking for a track. You know what I mean? Like I try and
that's the problem.
Keep the phone, like let's try and avoid all the other people that are on their phones at this moment. That's kind of my
when I went to Nashville like 3 or 4 months ago, because I met so many guys there, so I went up and so Ann said, my wife said, I said, hey, why don't you come up? And she said, no, go do your guitar thing for the first few days,
Yeah.
And then I'll come up because, she don't want to be going to Carter Vintage and all these shops looking for guitars.
Right, totally, yeah.
So, and I drove, and I never drive. It was like 10 hours, and it took me a while to figure out. She goes, how was the drive up? And I said, man, I loved it. Because we drove back together, and she was not interested. She, it wasn't like she'd rather hop on a plane, which is what most people do. And she goes, well, what did you like so much? And I realized I sat down and listened to music and smoked cigars for 10 hours straight.
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, road trips can be amazing. Like if you can get into if it's not like you don't feel like your life is threatened by trucks or something like that, or it doesn't get too stressful driving, just sort of grooving out for, 5 hours listening to stuff and then stop off, get some food and stretch your legs. And then, I still look forward to that stuff. Yeah. I love taking road trips.
Yeah. I don't think I've ever done, as an adult, I've never done that. It was just like so cathartic. I was like, wow. I mean, just listening to great music for 10 hours. I can't think of the last time I've done something like that. So it was really cool. Okay. So this is so interesting. I don't know what to talk about. When did you start pursuing music? Because you had mentioned you're playing gigs already by the time you were 12.
Yeah.
What instrument were you working on, or were you always guitar, bass, drums, sort of?
It was always rhythm instruments, and then somewhere along the way, one would take more, would take the driver's seat of the car, and more than others. So when I was 12, it was mainly guitar that I was into, and then at some point it was the drums, and at some point, like the first lessons I had was on electric bass, and I had an uncle, like I mentioned before, the uncle that played bass. And so it was just sort of that was my first proper, I guess, instrument that I had lessons on. And then I would play weddings with people in my family, and then like friends of the family that had wedding bands, I would play guitar and sing, or another time I'd play drums, or I was always sort of like flip-flopping between, and then it was only later in life when I hit like my late 20s that I finally kind of realized, I was like, oh, I think I like the guitar more than anything else. And what's cool about that though is all the other stuff that I played and all the other stuff I worked on sort of informs my guitar playing. And maybe like if you think maybe I sound different or unconventional, that might be the reason for it, just coming from a different headspace. Yeah,
that makes sense. And by the way, when I said unconventional, I meant that in a very good way.
Absolutely.
I mean,
sure.
I've listened to tons. Your playing is fantastic. I really enjoyed it. It's really, it's just like opening a new can that I've never seen before.
No, that's great.
Just
Thank
the way
you
you come at things. It's just really cool. You mentioned that you play with a thumb pick. I didn't realize that. What, was you always doing that?
Well, when I was, my dad was really good when it came to if I ever said I wanted lessons for something, he would make a call and then drive me to wherever I wanted to go for lessons. And in fact, he died about 2 years ago, a little over 2 years ago.
Sorry about that, man.
That's okay. Yeah, it's something that, it's really like it rattles you. But one of the things that I did was there was this like lesson, this route that we used to drive together to go to lessons, and then I took that route after he died to just sort of like say goodbye to him. But when I was 12, I became really interested in classical guitar, and I think I would have continued with that if I wasn't such a kind of weird kid, and then the teacher wasn't so sort of like starched, because
that's what you get with a classical teacher.
Yeah. And Hart School of Music is such like a respectable classical music program, and the teacher was from there, so it was sort of like this thing of I got a lot of the technique down, or he taught me proper technique, but then I just didn't have the focus to become a classical guitar player, but I just really enjoyed the sound of that, and I really, really enjoyed how the fingers work that way. And then later in life, I was playing electric guitar with a pick, and then I think my uncle died, and then my aunt had all of his records, and my aunt is sort of like my mom. She's my godmother, and she's like I have she's like the person like probably like love the most in my life, and we've just always been good friends. And she gave me all these Chet Atkins albums, and I'm like, growing up in the North, I'm not aware of Chet Atkins. And then like on one of the front covers, he's playing a Gretsch. It's a semi-acoustic, with pickups, like a semi-electric or whatever, semi-hollow bottom, whatever the right name is for it. But he's sitting there with a thumb pick, and I thought, like, oh, wow, what an interesting thing that you could approach electric guitar with a thumb pick. And then the more I thought about it, like Albert King played with his fingers. Albert Collins was very much just a finger player. And
he played with a thumb pick too, I think, Collins.
I think maybe,
he did. He played the telly with a thumb pick, yeah, for sure.
Okay, and then I know that there's a style.
Freddie King played with a thumb pick?
I don't think Freddie King did.
No, he did.
Oh, yeah, no, you're right. No,
thumb pick.
Freddie,
and
two finger picks.
Yeah, right.
Like on his index finger.
Right. The metal ones he played with.
Exactly, yeah. So for a second I thought Albert King, and I know Albert King just like played straight fingers.
Yeah, fingers. Yeah.
And so all of a sudden I'm like, oh, I like all these blues guys, and then there's a style that people play with a thumb pick that's like a hybrid style, or they use a flat pick and then they use their ring finger and middle finger as the sort of finger picking thing, and then keep the pick held like their index finger and thumb create the fulcrum point for the pick. But I just, from that moment on, I just thought it was so cool that I just started to practice guitar like that. And so I can't play with a regular pick to save my life now. It's like, it's so awkward and weird. I can only play with my fingers now. So,
and I would love to be able to play like that, but and every time I think I should do that, then I go back and listen to guys like Jimmy Page. I'm like, well, I guess you could do it without it. But I feel the need because it does make using your index and middle finger, it appears to make it much easier to do that. Obviously, if you're not so, when you're not, you got a lot more, it gives you more freedom with your thumb.
Yeah.
That's cool. I didn't realize you were playing with a thumb pick. That's very cool. I'm going to definitely look at that next time. The other thing I wanted to point out is you said you were drinking ponies. I think that's a thing in the Northeast. So if anybody listens to this doesn't know what a pony beer is, it's those little bottles, the tiny little bottles of beer they have, like for kids. I guess we just found out. You know what? Your uncle was the only guy using that correctly, because I don't know any adults who drank those. What
adult's going to drink a pony beer?
I'm surprised I'm surprised they don't come with nipples. This is ridiculous. We just solved this age-old problem. Why do pony beers exist? Oh my God.
So
how'd you get the gig with Paul Simon? I mean, that's an awesome. And you've been with him a while now, too.
Yeah, I have been. It's such a crazy, interesting story because, again, this is like even until my adult life, like me when I was a kid, I still held interest for lessons, and even I still like to take lessons now. I feel like it breaks up the way my brain works, and I still really enjoy taking lessons. And so at one point I got interested in the South Indian rhythm system that you sort of keep like in a nutshell, you keep the beat with your right hand, and then there's all these rhythm syllables that you sing before you even play them on an instrument. So you can sing all these rhythms using these Indian syllables, and I got interested in that. And so I started taking frame drum lessons with a teacher that at the time was at Berkeley, and he also played in Paul Simon's band. So we kind of hit it off, and he knew that I played all these other instruments, but it was more just an interesting thing to get into. And I probably played frame drum for a couple of years and would go out into the woods and like just practice for a couple of hours on a frame drum. And by no means am I like somebody like John McLaughlin who knows the Indian rhythm system and can like, you know, speak that stuff with you know, classical Indian music players and do it on the guitar. I never got that proficient on it. So I won't say that I'm like, you know, incorporating Indian stuff into my guitar playing, because I'm really not. But it was enough to kind of break my brain apart, and it made me play better time learning all these polyrhythms. And it kind of broke me out of just the strict sort of Western version of rhythm. And so then I studied with him, and then...
Where were you living at the time?
I can't remember. It's a good question.
Because he was Berkeley's in Massachusetts,
Yeah, Berkeley's in Massachusetts. I think maybe somewhere after college, maybe I was living in Connecticut, and then that's when I went up there. And then I moved down to New York, and I was living in New York City for a while. And then
what were you doing there?
Trying to figure everything out.
Where were you living? Where were you living at the time?
I think I was living in somewhere like Hoboken.
Okay.
Yeah, no, Hoboken, Jersey City. Okay. And then
Jersey City was rough back then.
Oh, it was really rough. And then my car got stolen, and I remember going like, you know, I need to like chill out and take a break for a second. And I heard about this artist housing that was opening along the shoreline in Connecticut, like around Mystic, New London area. And I thought, oh, that, you know, you could get an apartment for really inexpensive, and it was like in a beautiful area. So I thought, oh, I'll go out there and just chill out. And that's what I did. And that was like 6 months before 9/11 happened. So it was kind of chilling to move out of New York City, and then 6 months later, or move out of Jersey. And, you know, I wake up in the morning time and I could see the Twin Towers from my kitchen window. So it was just a strange thing to have happen. And so at that point, when I was living in, I guess I was around 27 or 28 years old. And when I moved into this artist housing place, my friend called me and said, you know, Paul Simon has bought a house in Connecticut, and his son wants to learn, you know, just wants to get into
your friend,
music.
You mean the buddy,
the
Berkeley guy, the
Berkeley guy, and
what is frame drum? I'm sorry, because I don't really.
Okay, frame drum is really interesting because basically you can think of a tambourine. Everybody knows a tambourine with a head on it on one side. And if you take all the jingles off of it, then you have a frame drum. And it would be that's a small frame drum. But if you can imagine a tambourine that's enlarged to say 18 to 20 inches across, you have a frame drum. And so that's sort of like the skeleton key of a rhythm instrument across the whole world, because every culture sort of has a version of a frame drum. Like American Indians have a frame drum. The bowran is the thing the Irish people play. They play it with a stick, but that's a frame drum too. It's just a frame with and then with a skin stretched across it, and then all the Middle Eastern drums. And it's all variations. Some have jingles, some have metal bells on the inside that you can shake and play. And so it's really, if anybody wants to watch an amazing frame drum player, Glenn Velez is his name, and he's like serious musician, and he's really fun to watch and get into. And if anybody's really interested in learning about that stuff, you could pick up a frame drum for like $75. Remo makes them, and then get like a intro to frame drum from a Glenn Velez video. And that's anybody that takes a guitar lesson with me, I'm always trying to tell them to just get into frame drum, because that'll make your guitar playing so much cooler. Like it'll just connect you with rhythm more, and the way that you can hold it in your lap is very similar to a guitar. And so when I was living in Connecticut at that time, my friend called and said, "Hey, Paul bought a house in Connecticut, and his son, who was 8 years old or 9 years old, wants to just start taking music lessons. He's interested in guitar, he's interested in drums, and he's, he always, like, we were kind of close, we got along really well, and he just said, he felt like he trusted me to give my name to Paul, and like he knew that I would look at Paul as just a dad that needs music lessons first, and I wasn't going to go there and like try and cop a gig, or what I mean.
Just fanboy shit kind of.
It totally. So and I was like, oh wow, like this is really crazy, and interesting. And then I thought, well, if it happens, then the office would call or something like that. And at the time, I was just going to the beach a lot, and I got back from the beach, and I'm like, I'm in the bathroom, like brushing my teeth or something like that. And then my answering machine goes off, and it's Paul Simon. And he's like, hey, I got your name and can you give me a call back? And I called him back and went down to the house, his house, and met his son. And then we kind of just hit it off. And after about, a year and a half of lessons, he really his son really liked guitar more than anything else. So I just ended up staying on as his guitar teacher, and that relationship was probably one of the coolest things that's ever happened, because I'm still friends with his son to this day. But it really morphed into like just a cool, fun relationship. Like it started out as just lessons, but then I'd give him a lesson, and then we go into a nice part of town and like go have pasta and go see a movie with each other. And like I kind of became like an uncle or his big brother or something. Like no pony beers. I
was going to say, let me show you what my uncle did, little Paul Simon.
Definitely not. No pony beers. I learned my lesson. I was like, lesson 101, don't give kids beer.
Uncle Jim, why are we in this bodega?
So, and I really have fond memories of that time. It was just so cool. And I think I was 27, he was 9 years old, and we were like two buddies that had been friends for 10 years, even though he wasn't 10 years old, So it was kind of crazy how it happened. And then, this is a very, very long answer to your question. And so I had written this tune. I think it's only available on iTunes now, but it was like an EP that I did. And I played guitar on it, and then I had Paul's wife, Edie Brickell, sing harmony on this one tune that I wrote. And I was moving to Brooklyn, and I had got the album finished.
Was that weird? Was that weird when you asked? I guess you were like a friend of the family. You just asked her like any other musician, hey, I have this tune I play. Yeah, I think you'd be good to sing background vocals on it.
Yeah, totally. Because and then even like really early on, I'd come over for a lesson, but then so maybe I'd show up at 4 or 5 o'clock, then go upstairs and then sit at the counter and have dinner. You know, they'd cook me something to eat and then make a big pot of coffee, and I'd sit there till like 9 p.m. and just kind of shooting the shit with them.
Okay.
And we just became like, I really felt, I just kind of became a part of the household, and spent some Christmas time with them. And I went to Thanksgiving there a couple of times.
That's nice.
And,
That's really
it was
nice.
a really beautiful kind of, you know, like human experience to have, where they would just, and they'd always be singing, you know, like, and like Edie be walking around just singing a tune, or Paul would be humming something and he walked past. And it was just like, really at the kind of me singing is like the last frontier that I feel like I still struggle with. I have good nights and I have bad nights with I feel like my intonation could be a lot better.
Hold on one second. When you, going back to your whole family stuff, was going through this experience with the Simons, I'm assuming it was a much more healthy kind of, was it like cathartic for you in a way, or was it like really, you probably really appreciated that a lot more than they ever knew? Initially, at least anyway, right? That's very insightful
for you to say that, because, you know, if I'm being completely, you know, 100% honest, yes, it was the sort of like, and like in some ways the downstairs for me making the sound was like a shelter in some ways, it was a safe place. Yeah. But it was funny because it was like this thing of like, I was always afraid to sing for some reason. And then, and of course, like in any sort of unhealthy situation, there's the typical saying is like, you lose your voice. And so, correct. Yeah. So later, you literally lost your voice. Literally lost your voice in a spiritual way or an emotional way, and then just a physical way. And so to sort of be around a family of people that, you know, they could sing their butts off, they're such good singers. It kind of made, and even the little kid at 9 years old, he just like, one of the fun thing that we would really do is I'd bring all these old blues lyrics, and then he'd play drums at the end of the lesson, and I would play guitar, and then I'd have him sing like off of the sheet of lyrics, and he would just be singing these old blues tunes. It was hilarious. Who, the little kid? Yeah, that's funny. Yeah, he sang so great, and so then I was like, oh, like I could be a singer too, you know, and so I'm still trying to get better at that. And so you got a lot more out of this developmentally, in a sense, than you ever would have expected, I would imagine. Oh yeah, absolutely. And then it's sort of like just to be around people of that caliber, and then to have them treat me like I'm a peer, not just a person coming over to the house. Like I mean, I remember one time. Well, you were a peer. You know, that's the truth of it. It's just that. And I understand this, when you come from that kind of a background, it's like others' opinions of you is much higher than your own opinion of yourself. I think by nature of the whole thing, you're right. Yep. Yeah, and then you have to grow into that, and it doesn't happen overnight. It's not like, you know, you read one book or you go to one therapy session, like, fuck, I got it now. Right. Totally. Because it really is the, you know, 20 miles into the woods, 20 miles out of the woods. Correct. You know? And so, but I remember like thinking at one time where it was Christmas and we were talking about using open strings like in a run or something like that. And he was like, well, come into the living room. And there's two acoustic guitars there, and like we're sitting by the fire, and he's just showing me some open string runs. And I was going like, wow, like, this is crazy, you know, like if someone got a time machine and went back to like, you know, 15 or 16-year-old self and was like, you're going to be sitting, you know, you and Paul will be sitting by a fireplace and talking acoustic guitar, I'd be like, you're out of your mind, you know? So it was really an amazing moment. And so basically what happened was I made those recordings, and then he really liked the recording that I made, and he started to make So Beautiful or So What. So he invited me into the studio one day to bring like everything, you know, bass, all my instruments, and then we were just him, myself, and then the producer Phil Ramone. We're just going to hang out and try and make something. So that ended up working out really, really well. And we kind of hit it off, and whatever he needed to have happen from the instruments, I was able to make happen. And then from there, I joined his band, and that's how the whole
that is
thing came about.
A fucking wonderful story, man.
Yeah,
it's so
pretty
cool.
It's a really cool because it started like with a simple thing where like a little kid just wanted lessons, and then it grew out of it. And then by the time, so now I also think that there's the element of, it's nice to have trust with somebody that you're making music with. So, and I think for any celebrity, the bigger you get, the trustworthy relationships. I'm not saying like Paul and I are best buddies or anything like that, but there's a comfort there just knowing that I taught his son, and and that I'm still friends with his son, and it's just been a cool relationship.
That's great. I'm really happy for you, man. That sounded like that was a really good story. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, no problem.
So you were on the album and you tour with him as well.
Yeah, I toured with him, and it was funny because initially he wanted to hire me as a guitar player, like sort of auxiliary percussion guy, and then the drummer left. So then he asked me to if I could cover the drum chair, and I was kind of like, if you want me to, to cover myself in peanut butter and roll around in raisins, I'll do it. And it's just like, it's just like, whatever.
Yeah, twist my, Paul, I'll do it this time, but
Yeah. Also, I'm like,
don't think I'm doing this every single time we go out.
Exactly. So, and then, but then he gave me a really nice guitar feature, which is like a Chet Atkins arrangement of a tune called Wheels. And but what's interesting is the tour that's coming up now. I mean, anything could happen between now and the springtime, but there's major talk of like they're just going to hire another drummer, and then I'll move to guitar. What kind of was the original plan, but I also found, maybe it's because I grew up with folk music or something, but I can play the African stuff really good on the drums. So I think he still wants me to play the African tunes on the drums, and then on the more American stuff, I'll switch to guitar, which
like lead electric, pretty much.
Yeah, electric. Yeah, which is kind of my wheelhouse on the electric. Like I'm not an African guitar player, but that's sort of how it all happened, and then. It was kind of like when I'm not on the road with Paul, anybody that wants me to play on their projects, I do that. And then mainly I just been making my own music and just trying to move that along. And that's kind of my life story, musical story in a way, and of course, before I met Paul, I was making a living as being a musician, teaching and just playing gigs, pickup gigs, everything. So it was definitely like, I was a trench musician in a way, sort of like in it, just trying to make it happen.
Is there any other way?
Yeah, right.
I mean, you're no different than anybody else playing music.
Yeah,
you're hustling gigs, and you're busting your ass, and you're doing what you can do, and looking for opportunities, and
Yeah.
What a great story, man! Honestly, thank you so much. That was really refreshing. That was like the good guys win. I was happy to hear that, man. That was really cool.
Yeah. It's.
No, go ahead. I apologize. No.
I was just going to say it definitely was like, how did I go from like hanging out at, oyster happy hours along the shoreline to playing in Paul Simon's band? It's like, it felt like an alien ship had landed, and all of a sudden I'm like in this other world, so it was pretty profound when it all happened. Yeah.
I write ad copy. I see a whole info product coming here out of this, man. Former oyster diving happy hour. Now on stage with Paul Simon. Yours, you can do this. Only $9.95.
Yeah, that's right. Right.
As you talked about World Trade Center, I worked in Tower 2 when I was 14. It was really weird. And so that was 1977. And I remember going up like into the elevators, and it wasn't really finished yet, the upper floors. And
wow.
all I remember is like they had this they don't have this job anymore. It was called a messenger. So like I would take papers, a lot of architectural plans, and bring them from one place to another. This is before fax machines, before the internet, before email, before Federal Express.
Yeah.
Or maybe FedEx had just started, but it was like, if you need something delivered across the street, it was like $400. So they paid a guy like me $2.90 an hour, which I was thrilled to get at the time. I'd work as 100 hours a week if I could. And but I remember working in Tower 2 and going upstairs, and all I saw was asbestos. The whole oh my God, the whole inside. And even as a little kid, I was like, man, I don't think that stuff's really healthy for you. I just remember.
Oh man, and then like just you think about all the people that are still suffering to this day, the first responders, and not having proper,
I know,
respirators or whatever the right term is. It's just like, oh man, it's just evil, the whole thing.
Oh, I know, but that was really cool. So. Man, I wish I had known about your records. I would have listened to him, talking to him. I want you to make me a promise that next time when the next album comes out, you come back on the show and I'll listen to it and we could talk about it.
Yeah, sure,
great.
Sure.
Thank you. Okay, so what are some obstacles that you've had to overcome besides the family stuff? Is there anything like on the business end, or just not even obstacles, but like lessons that you learned about the music business or about moving up in the music business?
Well, I think the main thing, the hardest lesson to learn is that no matter how much people pretend to be God, they're not God. And that just if somebody has an opinion of you or says something like, there's no place for you here, you should just make albums for your friends, or like they don't believe in you, that doesn't necessarily have to define anything, and it seems like I don't know. I mean, I've just been a musician for so long, so maybe I can't imagine that it would be any different if you were a lawyer but I think like even in sports or something, like if you're a lawyer, like if you pass the bar exam, you passed it, and there's some way you can define yourself as a lawyer. Or if you throw a ball at, I don't know, what's the fastest somebody can pitch a ball at? I don't know in baseball.
100-something miles an hour.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so 100 and something. Like, you can kind of measure that with a speed gun or whatever the cops use, or,
radar.
Radar. And but in the arts, with painting or music or dance or any of this stuff, it's sort of like you have this weird thing where somebody like Van Gogh, everybody thinks he's an idiot when he's alive, and then 50 years later, all of a sudden they think it's the greatest art that anybody's ever seen. So it's this idea of like trying to just connect with the reasons why I make music, and then try and keep the intentions pure and real, and then not be kind of like pulled in any direction just by whatever the current scene is or the current flavor is. And I think that, and at the end of the day, when we die, we lose everything anyway. And so to make it about like, I'm going to do this single so I can make, $1 million or something. I mean, to have that be the motivation, especially in the world the way it is now. Music was never easy, but I think it's even harder to you can't, people are really not making tons of money from album sales so, but I would say that like that was a hard lesson, because you would like everybody to be on board, or like, you want people, and then your career kind of depends on people liking you in a way,
Yeah.
But to have to sort of to kind of have like some sort of like bulletproof vest against other people's opinions, and I think I'm still weaving that vest, but it's I think that would be the thing that I would say to anybody coming up, or that nobody is really God, no one's a gatekeeper,
So don't let anybody's definition of where they think you should be or what they think your music should sound like define what you actually do with your music.
Absolutely.
Unless it's in context. I mean, if you've got a relationship like with Paul, if he said, "Hey, Jim, I think you might want to try this," that's a little different because you have a relationship. Absolutely. I mean, and I say it too of like, like, okay, I wasn't meant to play drums in Paul Simon's band. And even though Paul respects me, as a guitar player, people will come up and say to me that, when I play guitar, it's a hobby. And the real thing that I do is drums, and then when I sometimes do the Paul Simon. Have they heard you play guitar? Cause I've heard.
Yeah. But they're always saying, people say stuff like that. And then the funny thing is then I'd go back and do like a Paul Simon tour where I play guitar on it, but I'm playing, I'm playing like Steve Gadd's 50 Ways to Leave Your Lover on the drums, right. And then
not an easy run, not an easy fills at all.
So people are sending me, messages on Facebook telling me like, I'm nothing like Gadd. I'm not as good as Gadd.
Oh my God, are you kidding me?
Yeah. So it's like,
are you serious?
Yeah. Oh yeah. So
like who has the fucking time to do that?
See, I don't know, but that's what I say.
God.
Where it's just sort of like I have to go like, you
really?
You people can kind of like, you need to take a break, and that's what I mean is just to not let other people's definition of me define who I am. Like I feel, and I have a connection to a higher power. I don't have to get into the details of the belief, but at the end of the day, I just try and say, I define myself, and then my relationship with a higher power defines who I am, and then try and just say, and then other people's behavior is between them and their higher power, and I just try and stay detached from the opinion factory or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, I totally get that. Wow. That's a lot of effort someone's got to put into analyzing your like to get a hobby. I mean, does he have nothing to do? Like, what is he trying to say that like I didn't get compensated proper? I overpaid for the my concert ticket value wasn't there because you didn't replicate Steve Gadd's drum parts.
Right. Yeah. Right. Whatever.
Wow.
I'm just going like, and then there's, but then on the other side of it, then, after I made the record with Jim Keltner, he sent me this like beautiful text, and I wish
Jim or the same guy who bitched about Steve Gadd's stuff?
No, what's that?
Jim sent it to you, or the guy who was bitching about your?
Oh no, this is completely separate. Jim, after I made the record with Jim Keltner, he sent me this beautiful text message saying like, he's like, man, I don't know how you could, do both things. And he says, I just think it's great. And he said, I just chalk it up to amazing grace. And I thought like,
wow, how cool is that?
Like, what a beautiful thing to say to somebody, and somebody of, of his level. I mean, he played with John Lennon and Traveling Wilburys. I mean, he played just with everyone. So, and all my favorite blues guys too. He's on Albert King records and play with Ry Cooder. So, so to get a message like that from him, it's like, which one do you want to believe here, Mr. Oblon? The guy that you don't know, YouTube user 265, I played, should I believe in him, or should I believe with, if you're going to believe what another human being says about you, maybe you should go with Jim Keltner's opinion of you, so.
It was funny. Someone sent me a note, and they were like, listen, your show is good, but you say too much, and you blah, blah, blah. And so I read it to my wife. She goes, what do you think? I said, I think they're 100% right.
Yeah.
It's right. I say too much. I've been struggling with this and struggling with it. And I do the best I can. What are you going to do?
Totally.
I'm sure by the time we hit, look, it's episode like 150 as of today was dropped, something like that. By the time I hit 200, I'll be better. And maybe by 250, I won't be saying at all, but it's quite funny. But that someone took that much time to tell me that, I thought it was interesting. Yeah. And I don't, maybe they meant it constructively. I mean, I didn't care one way or another, but it was just funny. It was like, yeah, that guy's 100% right. He goes, and you curse too much. I was like, he's also 100% right.
I don't know, but
this is like,
also,
this is what do you call it? This is like not serious. This is like wild. I'm talking to musicians. I'm not talking to nuns.
Yeah, we're like, this is how we would talk at an oyster happy hour.
Yeah.
So let's just do that.
Actually, probably much worse. I feel like I've done a good job.
I would be much worse. Yeah.
Toning it down. So what would you say if you had to go back then and give advice to your younger self? What advice would you have given?
That's a real tough one, because, you can only, it's sort of like you can only have a perspective after you go through something. So I think I did a good job of everything, and I think I had enough people telling me what I should and shouldn't be doing, and the last thing I would want is for my younger self to have a time machine show up and have the current, 42-year-old come out and start telling him what he should be doing. I think that's kind of how I'm going to answer that question. I'm just going to say I'm just going to leave Jim alone.
Fair enough, man. That's a very fair answer. This is so interesting, but let's talk about gear for a minute, because since this is a guitar show. See, there goes. I can never get away from it. I don't know what it is. So
I'm probably humming the whole time too. So it's not a big deal.
Horrible. One of my buddies said, who has a podcast, he goes, Craig, hold a sock. And so I had I swear, and I was like, I was like, okay, I'll do anything at this point, So I used to sit here with a pair of socks, and then I was like, one day my wife comes in, she goes, what the hell is a pair of socks on your desk for? I said, I have no fucking idea, because it's not working, so I'm going to put it back in my drawer. So there you go. What's your go-to guitar right now?
The one that kind of sort of became a main part of my life, kind of unexpectedly, but I was talking to a guy from Epiphone who was at one of my gigs in Nashville, and I was saying to him that I was bummed that they stopped making this sort of like elitist custom shop Riviera. Now, a Riviera is basically a Gibson 335.
That's what I thought.
With a center block and then F holes, but it has smaller humbuckers, mini humbuckers, instead of full-size humbuckers. And he says, well, he actually said in Japan we released a limited batch of them. They're not really being sold in America. You could buy one online if you wanted to, I think. And he says, if you'd be interested in doing some videos or something, maybe, we can work out some sort of a deal. And so I did a contest where I created some background tracks for people to play to, and then I demonstrated, playing them on this guitar, and then people would send in their YouTube videos of them playing along to the background track, and then the most likes is what defined who won, and I think they got a guitar and an amp or something like that. And so when I got this guitar, there's something about the mini humbuckers that it's sort of, you can get a little more spank out of them than a full-size humbucker. They're less muscular. It's almost like a little sports car or something like this. Like just really powerful, but yet they're not so kind of woolly mammoth sounding. And so that's kind of became my main guitar now. And I have my tellies that I play, and I still love playing a telly. And then the other new thing is I put a parts caster together, a Telecaster, and it just felt really tight. So I threw 13 flat wounds on it and tuned it down to C.
Oh, wow.
So it's just like a regular, it's still, you play it like a regular guitar. It feels like a regular guitar. And then since it's tuned down, you can bend on it, but everything is just happening, 4 steps lower from, or whatever it is. Or 4 half steps lower. Yeah. And so those, I feel like I could get through the rest of my life with my Epiphone and this low C telly, because now I'm writing tunes and then doing arrangements for tunes on the low C telly, and it's just so much fun. It's just such a deep sounding thing, especially with distortion on it.
So what do you play with Paul in the studio? You play the Epi Riviera?
Yeah, I just did a session for Paul, he's coming out with a new album, and it was a really cool day in the studio. It was John Patitucci on bass, Nate Smith on drums, and then I can't remember I don't have any way to look. I can't remember the piano player's name, but basically I just played the Epiphone. We just cut one track, but it was really, it sounded really good. And then there's just something about the neck profile on it, and it's real lacquer. They shot it in nitrocellulose lacquer, and it's just become, it just feels so comfortable. So, but I am sort of getting back in, like I'm starting to miss the telly, even though this feels feels so great. I do miss my tellies a little bit. So
when you record with him, does he have like a home studio, or do you go like down into the city to record?
It's mainly like he does it at like, if it was a live band like we did, that was at like the old power station in New York.
Oh, cool. Very cool.
Yeah.
Who's influenced your playing that people might be surprised to hear? Are there any people like that?
I think people might be surprised just because he's a more of an obscure figure. I really connected with Roy Buchanan.
Oh, God.
So I love him.
Amazing, yeah.
And then when I was living along the shoreline, I would play sort of like any pickup gigs, and sometimes I'd play with these old World War II veterans, and so then I really got into Sidney Boucher, who's a soprano sax player from back, like the Louis Armstrong era, and now I'm like on this Bix Beiderbecke kick.
Drummer, right?
He's a trumpet player.
Oh, okay.
Trumpet player. He was around the same time as Louis Armstrong. And, playing guitar trio can kind of be daunting because, to play the whole night, I need to, kind of pace myself. And I'm kind of, not that I'm playing that older time music like Bix Beiderbecke played, but there's something about his attitude and the way he places his notes that it's starting to become a big influence on me.
That's cool.
I'm just listening to a lot of him lately,
Yeah, Roy Buchanan does something to me too, and he picks up. I mean, he's just a marvelous. I don't know anybody. The closest I guess to him would be Jeff Beck, but I think.
Yeah, and Jeff Beck dedicated one of his albums to Roy Buchanan, right? Yeah, so this is very. That's a really. I think that's like you could even say that like Jeff Beck is a legal extension of Roy Buchanan's playing. It's like that he would be the next step, if Roy had lived longer.
Well, sort of, because there's things Beck does that Roy didn't do, and there's a hell of a lot of things Roy did that Beck didn't do, but they were to have that kind of music made using just your fingers is nutty as hell. I mean, I interviewed two of Jeff's guitar players. I interviewed Jennifer Batten, who played with Jeff for 3 years, and I interviewed Carmen Vandenberg, who played with Jeff for a year on his last album. And I said, how does he do it? And both of them were basically like, beats the shit out of us. We're asking. We still would like to know the same question. It's just like he's not is from another realm. He's just so gifted. And they did, both of them say that he practices incessantly, which is not surprising. It's like Michael Jordan, he was the first guy there to shoot 1,000 shots before the game, and then he's, so when you're at that level, it's not like, random. He didn't roll out of bed and fog a mirror and become Jeff Beck, and to maintain that, so that was really cool to hear. If I asked you to pick your 3 Desert Island discs in no particular order, knowing that they could change any given time, what would you pick? What were those 3 CDs?
Okay, I would say, definitely, I would say that Roy Buchanan's, I don't know, it's just called Roy Buchanan. It's the black and white album with just sort of him on the front of it. I think it might even be like a silhouette type of thing. I think it was from 1973, 1972. I would say that album. And then from there, that's a tough call. I really have to, because it changes so constantly for me. I would say some Led Zeppelin recording too, and then probably like a compilation of Bach, Johann Sebastian Bach music, because I love him so much. So I think it would have to be something like that. Those three things.
Very cool. So, what are you working on now that you're kind of excited about?
I'm really excited about this album. It's all original music, and I wouldn't say it's blues. I guess you could put it as rock and roll or something. In the fall time this year, sort of like around the 2-year mark of my dad's death, I noticed I was getting a little bit depressed and kind of like I just kind of saw myself being low on energy, and I've always kind of keep a little extra money handy, and so I thought, I'm noticing myself sort of like not in the best place, and I thought a chunk of time opened up, and so I booked a trip to go visit my friends that live in Gothenburg, Sweden, and then I went down to Krakow, Poland. I don't know anybody in Krakow, but since that's where I got the news of my dad's death, I wanted to go reconnect with that area, and there's just such great food and everything. So I spent about 2.5 months in Europe, and all I did was write music and walk around, and there's a saying, move a muscle, change a thought. And so just by going to see my friends and then riding the trams or, walking everywhere for 2.5 months and just having like a walking life in Europe, it kind of cleared my head. And then by writing all this music, it really, it's probably the best thing I've ever done in my life, to tell you the truth, for myself. And so then when I came back here, it's about 75% of it's recorded now, but I'm doing this sort of Stevie Wonder, Paul McCartney thing where I'm just playing all the instruments, and it's going to be an 8-song album, and all the songs are already written, and like I said, 75% of it's recorded. I just need to go back when I get back to Nashville and put down the vocals and then kind of hone in on the guitar parts. And so that's the newest thing.
What's it called? Does it have a title?
It doesn't have a title yet. I don't know what I'm going to call it. Maybe the artwork will kind of define what the name of the record will be. But I'm excited about how it's sounding and how it came out, and then just the whole process of it. It felt like that so much of that time in Europe was alone. I felt like I needed to do the whole record by myself and not hire other players to play on it. So
you did all the mixing, the engineering as well?
I had my buddy Noel Scott White, who he tours with Sting, and he's like Vinnie Colaiuta's drum tech, and he worked with Herbie Hancock. He has a studio in Annapolis, Maryland, so he invited me out to work there. So I went out to his place and got the bulk of it done. And then my friend Kenny Varga in Nashville, I just cut a track at his studio. So, and that was like I got about 7 tracks done, the skeleton of them in Annapolis. And then the last one, I was able to finish up in Nashville.
That's great, man. That's great. Really cool. And when do you think that'll be out?
I'm hoping probably by the summertime.
That's awesome.
If I can, yeah. And the other records, like Sunset was with Jim Keltner and Larry Goldings, and that was more just like a jam session where there's maybe a couple of original tunes on it. But for me, that was just like I wanted to go out to L.A. and just play with those guys. And so that record was cut, live within 2 days. And that's sort of the jam session record. And then Black Cat, I played a lot of the instruments on that, but then I hired all Nashville players to play on it also. And so, and I think probably most of that's original music, if you can call it that. And then Skinwalker is just a documentation of the current trio that I play with. Like, we started to play with each other, and it felt really good. So we said, let's go into the studio and just document like how we sound. So, and that's
the trio in Nashville.
Yeah.
Who is that?
And
who's
it's
that?
Brian Allen and Wes Little.
Oh,
and
yeah. Brian and Wes play together all the time.
Yeah. Then they played with Robin Ford for years. And then actually just recently at the gig, Robin came in and played a set with us. And maybe it'd be nice. There's some talk, I don't know if it'll happen or not, about maybe the four of us recording together.
That'd be nice.
It'd be really, really cool if that happens, because he's certainly a hero of mine. So, and that's kind of like, the record making process, or for me, again, it's like, I just feel like I need to keep making music. So that's why I'm doing it,
I interviewed Brian quite a while ago. Super nice guy.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, he told me about that.
Yeah, really nice guy. He was very good, and he was like right before he got married, so he was all like,
"Oh yeah,
he was in that
beautiful
premarital, really excited." Yeah. So I was happy for him. Okay, so you got the album coming out in the summertime. Skinwalker and Black Cat and Sunset in the catalog.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to cover?
I think if people would just like a quick, view of how my guitar playing sounds, or how the trio sounds, we made a video at the House of David Studios in Nashville. So if you go to YouTube and type in Jim Oblon and put House of David, Jim Oblon House of David, the video will come up, and you can kind of get a feel for what the current thing is,
And if you also want to see some good playing of Jim, go to YouTube and enter Jim Oblon and Large Omets, LAURJOAMETS, and they do a really good Hendrix thing there. It's very cool, very, very cool. Well, man, I really appreciate your time, and you're such a sweet guy, man. I really appreciate you sharing all your stories, and I'm glad that you're in a good place now. You sound like you're everything's copacetic and manageable and flowing the right way.
Yeah, no, it's pretty groovy. I'm having a good time. I'm having a lot of fun. So
awesome. Well, let me tell people where to find you again. Go to Instagram. You can find Jim on there. It's Jim Oblon, Oblon. And you could also go to Bandcamp and just look up Jim Oblon, or you could enter Jim Oblon 1, the number 1. It's JIMOBLON number 1.bandcamp.com, and he's got Skinwalker and Black Cat on there. And is Sunset on there as well, or Sunset available? No,
Sunset was a Nashville company put it out called Compass Records. So that's you could find that, like there's even selling CDs on eBay and stuff like that. So that, I think Amazon has that one. And the other ones, to tell you the truth, I just sort of like didn't do much business behind it. I was just, because I was touring a lot, I just made them and put them up. They're available,
Cool. Well, check out Jim. He's an amazing player, a really good player, really soulful cat, as you can hear. And thank you, man. I really appreciate your time. I'm glad we got to connect. I appreciate your patience. Craig. We made this appointment a long time ago, man. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Everybody, thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this interview as much as I did. Thanks again to Jim Oblon for spending time with us. I really appreciate it. Go to everyonelovesguitar.com. Sign up to get notified about future episodes, along with some cool stuff we have. And remember, happiness is a choice, so be nice, go play a guitar, and have some fun. That's the most important thing to do. Till next time, peace and love, and I am out. We hope you enjoyed this show. If you did, subscribe to the Everyone Loves Guitar podcast, and you can do this online at everyonelovesguitar.com or on iTunes. And if you like the show, please leave us a 5-star positive review. The more 5-star reviews we get, the higher our show ranks, and higher rankings mean we get to continue speaking with cool, interesting guests on our show. We'll see you on the next episode, and until then, keep playing your guitar and have fun making music.